Are you ready for some Q&A? Because I am. I'm eventually going to have to get new questions. I feel like we're going to be okay for a while. Like, there's a lot in there, but we will see. I'm going to sneeze. But now that I said I'm going to sneeze, I'm not going to sneeze. I think we're good. Usually I sneeze in threes. So typically there's going to be one more sneeze coming, but now because I said that. Who knows? All right. And our questions today are, what is the most difficult part of your artistic process? And do you try to be more original or to deliver to readers what they want? Alrighty. What is the most difficult part of your artistic process? Sitting down and doing it. I think so if you watch the video with me and Nicole, we kind of talked about a little bit about this, right? This idea of like, what's the easiest or what's the hardest part of the process. I feel like it varies project to project. It varies book to book, like in terms of like all the books. This is the wall. Ta-da! I've shown it to you guys before. Like book 1 was fun. Oh my gosh, it was also like 14 years ago, so I don't actually know how much I remember about writing it, but book 1 was really fun. But I also didn't have like, this whole thing was not mapped out while I was writing book 1. This was a process of 14 years of tweaking things. And like, that's part of the reason why it took me so long to publish this first book. And here comes my kid, was I wasn't 100% sure what was going to end, how this is book 5 over here. I wasn't 100% sure how this was going to end. I knew a lot of the in-between stuff. There's still some things that I'm like book 3 needs a ton of work. But I think the hardest part of the artistic process is just doing it. They're like moths. They're attracted to light. Go. Yes, you. I have 1 kid home right now. 2 of them are playing over at a friend's house and the other one's out with dad. And he's normally the kid that wants nothing to do with me. Because dad is the coolest. Which is fair. Dad is the coolest. So I think the most difficult part of the artistic process, here's what it comes down to. Genuinely, the hardest part is when I finally have the time to sit down and do it, and my brain wants to do literally anything else. And the amount of times I just have to like, okay, I'm just going to set a timer and I'm just going to edit for like 10 minutes. Because my brain's like, okay, well, we can do this for 10 minutes. And most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the timer will go off and I'm like, okay, I'll just finish this page, right? So I end up going a little bit over the 10 minutes. But I feel like the hardest part is doing it when you don't want to do it. Like that's actually like people will be like, oh my gosh, I don't know how you sit down to write a book. I do it even when I don't really want to do it. Like if I only wrote when the muse took me, it would take me like 14 years. Oh, wait a minute. In the beginning, that's absolutely how I wrote, was just like, oh, when inspiration hits, I just sit down and I plow out a whole bunch of stuff. But with little kids, when inspiration hits, I don't have time to sit for 2 hours or 3 hours and just write in like a blur, because I have little kids and they like, you know, I didn't even make it 5 minutes into this video before somebody was like, hi, Mom. So part of it is that. Part of it, I think, is over the course of this last 14 years, I've learned a lot about how writing works for me, and carving out that time and creating some kind of routine is actually super powerful. I'm the person where I thrive better on routine, but mentally I don't like routine. Like consciously, I'm like, well, I like things to be a little different every day. But actually, I thrive when things are the same. I thrive best during the school year when it's like, we wake up, we get these kids to school, we do this, we do that, which will be a little different this year because everybody's staying home for school. But like I actually thrive better in an environment where I can do the same thing. I have times to do everything. Whereas the weekend is really fun because I'm just like, whatever, we'll do it. And actually summer, I love summer for the fact that my husband is home because he's a school teacher. So he's home during the summer, but it makes working actually really hard because my brain's like, oh, Jake is home. Therefore we can just do whatever we want because that's what we do on the weekends. Like I really try to just be like here on the weekends, not here, but like, you know what I'm saying? And so during the summer, he's home all the time. And so it's like trying to like get my brain to like, no, we need to work because he's like, even though he's home, we still need to we still have a lot of work we need to do. So I think the hardest part of any artistic process, because sometimes the drafting is hard. Mostly I really enjoy drafting. Sometimes editing is hard. Mostly editing is hard for me. The actual sitting down and making the changes, the taking it from what I've written here into here, as long as the notes I write here are good, moving it is fine. It's when I write something like fix this and then I'm like, cool. And then I sit there and stare at the computer like, I don't know how to fix this because you should have fixed it then. I knew there was a problem. I wasn't sure how to fix it then. And now I'm staring at it. I still don't know how to fix it. And so sometimes that's hard. For me, I think editing, if I had to pick a part of the process, I would say editing. But in general, anytime I have the time, I've set aside the time, I'm going to sit down and work, immediately my brain is like, but I don't want to. And so being able to be like, you don't have to want to do it, you just got to do it, is actually powerful, but also like part of the hardest part for me personally. Okay. So do I try to be more original or to deliver to readers what they want? Neither. So here's my opinion about originality. There's no such thing. Here's my point. All creation is reorganization. This is my personal opinion. I don't need people to agree with me. They can be like, Donica, that's crazy. It's okay. It's okay. This is how I look at the world. All creation is reorganization. For example, I wrote some books. I didn't invent the alphabet. I didn't invent any words, actually. Like, I think pretty much all of the words I use are other words. Whether they're words in a different language or they're being used in a different way, that's true. But that's just reorganization of ideas, a reorganization of the alphabet, a reorganization of established words, right? In the same way that when I cook something, right, even if I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a roast. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise the pig and I'm going to, or the cow, I don't know, whatever you use to make your roast. I'm going to raise the cow and I'm going to grow the potatoes. I'm going to grow the corn and I'm going to grow the wheat. And I'm going to grow the celery and I'm going to butcher my own cow for the roast and I'm going to use its bones to make the bone broth. And I'm going to, get my carrots and onions and all the things that I grew and my wheat and I'm going to cook it and grind it and chop it and baste it and cook 100% as from farm to table as you can possibly get. I did not personally create the cow or any of it, right? Like I may have put the seed that was already created into the dirt and made sure that it got enough water and food and all the things to grow properly. I may have been the one to pull it from the ground and to chop it up and to wash it and cook it and take it through this whole process. So it's been reorganized into this lovely roast dinner. But I didn't actually, none of it's original from me, right? Like I may have reorganized it in a new way that people haven't seen before. I used a really classic example of a roast dinner, but I did not actually create any of this originally. So my desire to be original, like I think it's a waste of time. Honestly, I think it's a waste of time. Now, there's kind of two schools of thought. So I genuinely don't worry about trying to be original because, like I said, I think it's a waste of time to pursue that because actually God's original. The rest of us are just working with material he's already created and reorganizing it in different and new ways. So that's the way that I look at it. Because I think also personally for me, it takes a lot of the pressure off because I'm like, I can sit here and kind of screw around with like, oh, that's kind of new. That's kind of different. I kind of like that. And it's not like, oh, I have to create this new thing. Otherwise, everybody will judge me for just being a copycat. Like, nope, I am a copycat. I'm just copying everything God does. And maybe I'm putting my own twist on it, right? I'm doing it the way Donica would do it. And then for the second part, to deliver to... so do you try to be more original or do you try to deliver to readers what they want? There are kind of two schools of thought with this among authors, specifically indie authors, I feel like. I'm not super into the traditional crowd of authors, so I don't know because I'm not traditionally published. Most of my author friends are indie published. I have a couple that are traditionally published, but excuse me. There's basically two schools of thought. One is right to market, right? So if you're like, okay, I'm going to write rom-coms are really in, and I'm going to write a rom-com, and this particular trope is trending, and so I'm going to write a thing with that trope, and like really try to like write to market. And there's some people like, if you don't do this, you won't be successful, which, you know what? That's totally fair. And if you love writing that way, like no judgment, right? Like I think that we all have different ways of writing and different things that work for us. And some of us need a lot of structure to create the story. And some of us are like, well, I'll kind of come up with it as I go along. Or some of us are like, well, I have this story idea and then I can stick it into this structure. Like there's so many different ways to write a story. But this specific story, I may change my tune in the future with different stories of like, well, I kind of want to write this genre. What's looked for in that and how can I make it as successful as possible? But this was a story that came to me first as a story. And so I wasn't like, I didn't sit down and be like, I'm going to write a young adult fantasy story that's going to be five books long and use this type of composition and right? Like that's not how I sat down to start the story. I started off with characters who started talking to me and like the story kind of like grew from there. And so I'm writing the story I wanted to read, and will hopefully find readers for, but also like you can write. This is the way that I look at it. If I'm only writing to give readers what they want, I will always find somebody dissatisfied. That said, if I'm writing to tell the story, then I'm not worried as much what readers want because I'm trying to find the story. But as a reader myself, I also know what I'm looking for in a story. And I have a tendency to that kind of gets folded in anyway. Does that make sense? So I feel like it's kind of neither is what I like. Do I try to be more original or do I try to deliver to the readers what they want? Neither. Right now I'm just writing the story because I want to see how this ends and I want to have all 5 of these books on my shelf so that their story is done and then I can pick it up and read it whenever I want to, because I actually really love this story. And so it's kind of there. And I think in the future, I have like a mystery series that I kind of want to write. That would be kind of like Nancy Drew style, right? Where it's just each story is its own thing, but they all kind of go together. And I might reference ones, like Watching Murder, She Wrote, basically, but in book form, which actually they have those and I've read them and they're really fun. So if you're looking for a cozy mystery and you liked Murder, She Wrote, they actually have Murder, She Wrote novels, which is really fun. But they, I kind of like that idea. And I think for that one, I might go more towards like looking at, I still will want to tell the story, but it will be more episodic, I think, versus like this is a whole story all connected from book 1 to book 4 or book 5. It's all the same characters, and even though each book has its own issues, right, their own problems that they're trying to solve, there is an overlying, like an overarching story throughout the entire series of like problems that came up in book 1 that won't be solved until book 3 or 4 or 5, right? They're these kind of like Harry Potter in the sense of like each book has its own issues, but there's an overarching plot to the whole thing as well. This is also that. Whereas like my mystery series would be each book is a standalone. And if you like pick up book 8, that's the one that you find first, you can read it and totally understand what's going on. And then you can be like, oh, there's 7 more books before this. Well, I'm going to go back and read those. And you'll be like, oh, okay, so that's who that person was. Okay, and then when you reread book 8, there'll be all the kinds of things like, okay, so when she said, like that happened last summer, you know, it's not necessary to this story of book 8, but I'm like, oh, now I know what she's talking about, right? Like picking up those like little like Easter eggy type things. Whereas this, if you were to pick up book 4, you'd be like, what the fudge is happening? And kind of similar with Harry Potter, like you can't really pick up book 4 and just be like, you can. She's tried really hard to make it so if you happen to pick up book 4, you can kind of follow along. But I have friends that did not read Harry Potter because they were introduced to like book 3 or 4 and they're like, what even is this? I'm like, you jumped literally into the middle of the story. You need to go back to the beginning and start over. Like you can't just like turn it on. It's exactly the same thing like with Murder, She Wrote would be with like with my books, right? If you just happen to turn on the TV and you're sitting there watching season 11, episode 3, you can like watch without there being any issue. Whereas if you're watching something like Lost, you're going to be very lost. Well, let's be honest. If you watch the start to the end, you're still lost. That's why they called it that. But anyway, so I hope that answers some questions. I enjoy doing these Q&As. Mostly I enjoy the sound of my own voice. Just kidding. A little bit. Not really. I just like talking. I don't know if you ever noticed that. I inherited my mom's ability to talk. So I can go for a really long time. Approximately 17 minutes and 45-ish seconds.